podcast you're about to listen to is from a book series on post-qualitative, new materialist, and critical post-humanist research. I'm Karen Murris and chief editor of this new Routledge series. You can find it on the following website, www.postqualitativeresearch.com.
This podcast is for Chapter 3, titled Collaborative Innovations into Pedagogies of Care for South African Hydrocommons. My name is Aaniyah Omardien, and I'm the author of the chapter, but I wanted to include Daiyaan Petersen in this conversation because this chapter includes my ancestry, and he has helped me with this part of reclaiming who I am as a brown Creole woman from Camisa, or Cape Town. The sea, being a water body and one of the forms of water that make up our hydrocommons, is in my blood from a long lineage of ancestors that were brought to the Cape as slaves in the 1600s. I'd like to read a passage from Sylvia Vollenwerfen's book entitled Keeper of the Coombe. When we seek to remember, to put ourselves back together again, and end the instability of separate selves, we have to work with the ancestral presence of the past. I met Daiyaan through Instagram because of a drawing I posted to my stories that I had been working on of an elderly woman. My mom had given me the photograph and said her aunt had given it to her and that the elderly woman was family. Daiyaan was intrigued by the drawing and photograph and messaged me to ask me who she was. Thank you, Daiyaan, for joining me. And before we begin, maybe you could share with the listeners who you are and what your interests are. And then we'll move to some questions.
So my name is Daiyaan Petersen. I'm an honours student at UCT in the Environmental Science and in the Environmental and Geographical Science department. And my focus is mostly on human geography. However, I've sort of got a double life that focuses on the history of the subaltern, the colonized people, at the Cape, and I try to combine my studies with my personal and private research by focusing on, the effects of, the social history of Cape Town and how it plays out, especially today in contemporary society.
Sure, it's just so fascinating. And I've got the photograph here of my aunt. And I wanted to ask you, what intrigued you about the woman and the photograph when you saw it?
Yes. So this photograph right here of your great grandmother.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Sure. Look, as I said, I have a great interest in the history of the Cape Muslim community at the Cape, the Creole community, post-slave community, and seeing this image. Being on Instagram, scrolling through stories, and then suddenly this photograph pops up of somebody that I don't know, posting it, of a woman that appears to be a Cape Malay typical auntie from like the 1890s in your Victorian dress and with your Ottoman hat, hoochie thing and so on. And even like the stripes on the dress and so on. I was just so fascinated as to who could this be, because I've familiarized myself with, I don't want to say most, but a lot of the photographic material of the Cape Muslim community, specifically at the Cape. And I managed to, if I have not identified the individuals, I know the faces of the photographs. And this was one that I've never seen before. So I was incredibly fascinated as to who could this be, I need to figure out, who's this woman, where does she fit in, where do her features come from? What was her role in the community? Who are her descendants, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really struck me that, your interest in this specifically, and also your knowledge on all these different languages that you have had to learn in order to track and trace our ancestry. So why this particular interest in tracing Creole ancestry?
Yeah. I suppose that is it's a very personal thing, coming from a very mixed background. My maternal grandfather being of Pashtun Afghan descent, but coming from India. It was my maternal grandfather. My paternal grandfather being a white Cape Townian whose grandfather came from Denmark, and then there's like a lot of Malay and Indian and this and that mixed in there. And then growing up in the house of my great grandparents, that I lived with up until they passed when I was like 19 years old. My bedtime stories were of the Cape Muslim community, of Old Cape Town, Vryburg, and hearing about the Creole community and culture and history of Cape Town. And by the time I reached like mid-high school, when I was like 16 years old, I just felt like, I've heard all these stories. I know Cape Town, or I thought I did, and I need to know more. And it was from that I embarked on doing some archival research. I found out about this amazing place called the Archives, and that it holds like all the secret history of Cape Town and the families and so on. And it was really from there that I officially started conducting research into this community, or these people at the Cape, our people.
Thank you. So what is it about dates and time, language and history that intrigues you and keeps you motivated to keep finding answers?
Sure. I think when we use the word Creole, it specifies the mixed nature of these people at the Cape. And by the fact that they are mixed, it means that they come from people of different languages, people of different lands, people that have different concepts of time. In my recent research, specifically of the tombstones, I discovered that the slaves and the Cape Muslims at the Cape, specifically those brought from Southeast Asia, had a different calendar to anything that we know today, which was called the Saka calendar, which was an 8-year cycle of years, which would alternate every 8 years. And within the cycle, in trying to do the science and the mathematics of figuring out this calendar, they would have to look at the tides, they would have to look at the constellations, they would have to look at so many different things. And so coming from such a complex understanding of time, and then being enslaved and put into this Gregorian system of time, I believe it actually assisted them in having a liberated mindset, which is why a established community exists today that still existed in the slave period. And so just bringing in that concept of time. But in terms of languages, I mean, these slaves came from all over. They came from South India, which is why we have the word Nachi, Narate, from Tamil. So many Malay words, pisang, kaparang, pirang, labarang. And obviously the language itself based on Dutch. There's other things based on Portuguese. We've even got a Japanese word in our language, mibos, umeboshi, which is, a dried apricot.
Yes.
Exactly. So yes. It's just the nature of the community being so complex, and I suppose also my personality of wanting to find out not just where they come from, but where do I come from? How do I fit into this community? And at the same time, how do I fit into the global tapestry of the world? The weaving of the languages, the weaving of time, the weaving of skin color, of eye color, of ethnicity, of cultures.
Wow, thank you. That's so beautiful. And I love how you've ended on weaving. And that ties in with the mother hydro rug, which I'm also working on as part of my PhD. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing. And thanks for bringing me on your journey. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you would like to know more about this chapter, please visit the website www.daiyaan.org. postqualitativeresearch.com. And please stay tuned for future podcasts.